She literally evaporated from the streets
The
of
last
New York.
time, didn't the story go that Gladys turned around a second time to wave goodbye?
Oh yeah.
And saw her at Fifth and
basically, you know,
a couple blocks away.
Or something like that, yeah. But and so that was it. So yeah, she just sort of vanished from the earth into the history books. Over the following months, many people from across the country claimed to have seen her because after the news got out, people were phoning in tips from all around the country claiming they'd seen her. And the family, being rich, they had a lot of money to actually send detectives out to follow up on all these leads, and so they were mostly followed up on, and none of them panned out, unfortunately. So when she didn't return home in the evening, her parents started calling all of her friends looking for her. Nobody knew what had happened to her. Now let me take a break here. Before we launch into more history and theories, here's a few things about her life just before the disappearance. And I'm talking about these things now because they'll have a little bearing later on in the story. Okay, number one, Dorothy was interested in being a writer, and she had actually written 2 short stories and submitted it to a magazine called McClure's, which I've never heard of, but you know, they're probably gone by now. And they were rejected, which left her feeling a bit depressed, apparently.
Which I just think, Steve and I were chatting about this earlier.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking how, I guess, cute and funny it is, not to be, dismissive of the impact that this can have on someone, but how kind of cute and funny it is that she submitted 2 papers and they got rejected, and she was like, well, shucks, my career as a writer is over.
I know, it's like, yeah, I know. You're supposed to have a little bit more persistence.
Yeah, or, maybe submit to another magazine that might be more interested in your writing style.
Yeah,
it seems like she was aiming for the top only. But then again, if you do the readings on this, her family knew that she was a writer, so there's all this talk about how they were mocking her. The only place that I think she submitted 2 to them and 1 to another magazine.
Something like that. Not a lot, though.
Let's think about 1910. There are tons and tons of magazines and newspapers and rags around that you can submit to.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm not going to cast any aspersions on her, but I think that maybe a bit of her social status told her that she had to only go for these particular ones.
Like the equivalent of the New Yorker.
Right.
Yeah.
Then I am from the upper class, so I must write for the New Yorker.
I know. Why not write for Field
I need to cut my teeth, and I'll get my stuff published wherever I can get it published, because that's the way all of the good writers in this world have gone about it.
Well,
they wrote crap, they got it published by crap people. And eventually they got better.
And clearly her problem was that I'm sure she was sending them in under her own name instead of a male pseudonym.
Well,
that's another good point.
It's another point entirely.
I think actually women writers were kind of accepted back in those days.
They were...
not so much. There were some women writers, but when did suffrage happen? When did the suffrage movement go through?
That was like in the 30s.
Yeah, so this is pre all of that.
No.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the 1930s?
Yeah.
No, it was the early 1900s, late 1800s.
Okay, so but this is when all that's happening, and there's still a huge bit of misogyny is not the right word. What is it?
A little bit of it.
Yeah, it's some of that, and it's the old boy society. It's men do this, and women clean the house, and take care of the children.
And that's why Dorothy was a socialite.
Right,
because maybe today she'd actually be doing something useful. Back in those days, you're rich and you're not expected to actually do anything, like become a dentist or a lawyer or anything like that.
And Devin's got a great point, though, is that as a woman, if she had set it in under the name of Dawn instead of Dorothy, it might have gotten picked up. They're like, oh, well, Dawn's not that great of a writer, but we'll publish his stuff. It's okay.
Well,
whereas
the thing about it is I forget what the title of one of her stories was. It was like
the Phoenix or the
Lotus.
No,
it was like the Poinsettia and the Flame.
Yeah.
And if you want to sell your story, it should have a title like Pork Chop Hill.
So what we're saying is she should have been submitting to Harlequin.
Yeah. Anyway, so she gave up obviously, although we didn't see the notes. They might have been quite brutal. It's just like Dear Miss Arnold, thanks for submitting your excrescence. Please don't ever do this again. You don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know if when they sent rejection letters, if they actually sent it back all marked up.
Mm-hmm.
That would crush somebody. If somebody sent back your manuscript and they had taken the time to red pen it,
I don't think they did.
I don't think they
even return your manuscript. I think they just send you a letter and save on postage.
Well, but that's what I'm getting to the point of the way that it's portrayed and how strongly she took the rejection. You would think that somebody had taken the time to red pen all of her work and send it back and say, all of these things are wrong. No, thank you.
That, or, she was the daughter of a very wealthy family and was not used to being said no to.
Good point.
Could be.
Very good point.
I mean, just saying.
Yeah.
Or maybe she just was a really bad writer and she just couldn't perceive this. But anyway, we're kind of getting off into the weeds here.
Yeah.
All right, so I mentioned her abortive writing career. Also, what else happened? A few months before she disappeared, Dorothy asked her father if she could move out of the house and get an apartment in Greenwich Village where she could write and be all artistic and stuff.
And someday meet Bob Dylan.
Yeah, Dad said no.
That was the same time, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Pretty close.
Totally.
It was 20th century.
Yeah,
So, yeah. He said no, and he said something on the order of, a good writer can write anywhere, so you can write in your bedroom, honey.
I feel like that's a great answer, though.
I know.
I mean...
Okay, we've already gone in the weeds once, but I'm going to stand up for Dad here a little bit.
Yeah.
I already pay for all of this kid's stuff, and I give her an allowance. And by the way, living at home is free, and eating at home is relatively free. But now you want to get an apartment, which means you want me to pay for said apartment and all of your bills.
Well, and on top of that, I think back in those days that a woman moving out of the house before she actually found a husband and got married, well, that
was frowned upon.
I was just going to say,
quite.
at 25 in those days, if you were not actively courting someone suitable to your parents' liking, you were probably not doing super well according to your parents.
Yeah, she was actually courting somebody. We'll talk about that in a little bit here.
Yeah.
But
we're almost there.
He was not suitable, unfortunately, to the parents.
No.
Yeah, her dad did make a remark along the lines of he wouldn't mind her dating more guys at all, just not worthless guys or something.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. I think we're there.
Yeah, I think we are.
So speaking of that guy, in September 1910, about 3 months before she disappeared, Dorothy told her parents she was going to go visit a former college classmate in Boston. She did go to Boston, but she didn't hang much with her classmate, but she spent the week with a guy named George Griscom Jr.
Griscom.
Yeah, I think it's Griscom. Well, maybe it might be Grissom or something like that.
Griscom.
I think you got it right.
Let's go for Griscom, yeah. He was from a rich family in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They were all proper about it. They stayed in separate hotels, not just separate rooms, but separate hotels. So maybe no copulation occurred. We don't know. But a lot of the Dorothy Arnold theorists out there think that it did, and it forms the basis for a lot of their ideas about why she disappeared. So a little bit more about him, George Griscom. She was seeing him, and obviously there was something going on there, but Dorothy's father basically forbade her from seeing him, because even though he was rich, he came from a good family, he was considered to be, by Dorothy, Mr. Arnold, to be a worthless slacker.
Yeah, I mean, he was like 40-something, 42, right?
Yeah.
And living at home and kind of just like living off of his parents' money, not
pretty
really.
much, yeah.
He wasn't earning anything for himself.
Yeah, I had heard that he went to law school and got a law degree and was working as a contract lawyer. For doing contract law, but apparently not working too terribly hard.
Yeah.
And still, if you're 42 and still living at home, you're really not very ambitious, let's face it. Yeah. Well, sorry. You're not 42.
That's true.
Yeah. Right, yeah. He wasn't out making an name.
I don't
for
even know where
himself.
that was going.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah. I'm just kidding.
Feel better about my life
I
now.
just really wanted to stick a finger
I'm not
in your
gonna
eye.
go throw myself off a bridge like Dorothy did. Oh no, wait, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're getting ahead of her.
Yeah.
You gave away the ending. No, she didn't really throw herself off a bridge.
So George was not a suitable suiter.
Not in the eyes of
parents.
Dad.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the folks didn't actually find out about this Boston thing with Griscom until after the disappearance, when apparently the Boston police discovered that Dorothy had pawned $500 worth of jewelry to pay for her hotel room. And this leads me to observe that if copulation actually had occurred, you would think that Griscom would have paid her hotel bill at least.
As a gentleman.
Don't you think? Wouldn't that be the classy thing to do?
Well, and
he doesn't sound like he had a lot of class. Let's be honest.
Well, he might have been on a short leash too. Maybe the folks didn't give him a huge allowance.
I think we need to back up here a little bit.
Yeah.
I think we've missed a salient point in this story, which is, so she disappeared. And then now we're talking about like some of the investigation that found Griscom. But I think what's important for people to understand is the cops weren't brought in
until kind of
3 weeks later or 2 weeks later.
It varies, you know.
Yeah,
actually,
it was weeks later because they were keeping it under the rug. They called their lawyer.
Yeah.
And the lawyer looked for her.
No, the lawyer didn't. He hired a private investigator.
Well,
It turns out
he actually did a lot of looking too.
But the thing is that I think people understand is this didn't become a full-fledged investigation right away.
Although
she disappeared, they didn't say anything because there's that
They
weird.
didn't say anything to the cops for a while because they probably were thinking that there could be something scandalous here. Like they're going to search for her, and then when she turns up, she's going to be like shacked up in a hotel room with some dude,
right?
Something like that,
right?
So
but I mean,
they wanted to keep it out. They wanted to keep it quiet.
There was all kinds of rumors of weird stuff that they did. Somebody called the house. One of her girlfriends called the house the night she disappeared, and her mother said, "Yeah, she's here. Oh, can I talk to her?" No, she's asleep in bed.
Yeah, she went to bed with a headache or something like that.
Yeah, which is, I mean, there's a lot of weird things about this story, and I think that it's that natural tendency of people with money to try to hide anything that's going on. But it's an important point for people to understand that it wasn't suddenly the police were investigating her disappearance. There's a time lag here, which is always a detriment to an investigation.
Yeah, well, hell yeah. But according to some accounts, the time lag was, most accounts actually, the time lag was 6 weeks before they talked to the cops.
Yeah, but they hired...
they supposedly hired Pinkerton Detectives.
Which is like a fairly famous detective agency, as it turns out.
Yeah, although actually in a newspaper account that I read of it, the newspaper account kind of made it clear that the police had actually been brought in much earlier, like a week after she disappeared.
Really?
Yeah, but they didn't actually go public until about 6 weeks after.
Oh, okay. See, when the articles I came across insinuated that it had been multiple weeks, but that might be just when it was released.
It's also hard to tell, as again, Steve and I were talking about this earlier, and we were talking about the fact that, late 1800s, early 1900s, all of these articles kind of just read like People magazine.
They do.
And it may be, slight differences in the writing styles, things like that. But a lot of it is just kind of, well, we heard from a source that so-and-so knows that so-and-so knows that so-and-so said, blah, 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 blah. It reads like a gossip column kind of more than actual news is what we're used to.
Yeah, I was going to talk about this in a little bit. This article from the Pittsburgh Press that came out in 1914 that was a big game changer for the whole thing. And it was like, and the article contradicts itself. It's kind of incoherent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of contradicts itself. But anyway, more on that later. All right, so the Arnold family asked a friend who was also a lawyer. His name was John Keith, and they hired him to try to find Dorothy. So Keith,
Dorothy.
Sorry, not Dorothy. Keith was a lawyer and not a private eye, so I suspect that they hired him because of attorney-client privilege.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
If they wanted to keep it low.
Yeah, and plus he was a family friend, so he could be expected to keep it on the DL. So, yeah, and as we said, they didn't want publicity. They reportedly didn't tell the police for 6 weeks, although maybe it was less than that. But the police managed to keep quiet about the whole thing, although that's kind of surprising because the police, even these days, are kind of corrupt in New York.
Yeah, they're known
even more corrupt.
Yeah.
They're known to, sell information to reporters. But that would be a good reason to keep them out. So anyway, John Keith came over to their house and searched her room looking for clues. Apparently all of her stuff was there, her clothes and everything else.
Save for the one outfit she was wearing, right?
Of course, yeah. She had to go out. She couldn't go out naked, for Christ's sake.
Wow.
Yeah, well, she could.
But.
Yeah.
She didn't.
That would be, looked upon with disfavor. But he found some burned papers in the fireplace, which everybody assumed were just the manuscripts that had been rejected by McClure's. Again, come on, Dorothy, man up. Send it out to somebody else under a phony name.
Send it cracked, man. They'd accept
it. They found brochures. Who?
Cracked.
Cracked? Yeah, they probably would.
Sorry, I'm so
Mad
sorry,
magazine.
everyone.
What else is there? One thing that piqued a little interest is they found some brochures apparently for steamliners to Europe. Because remember, in those days, they didn't have 777s. You had to actually take a slow boat. And that fueled a lot of speculation then and even today that she wanted to run off and join Griscom or somebody else and just, start a new life. John Keith checked hospitals, jails, morgues in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, looking for her body or whatever, and he found nothing. Finally, he suggested hiring the Pinkerton Detective Agency.
Which is still in operation today.
Yeah.
And is a very famous historic investigation service. Just throwing that out there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. No, they
Google
keep
Pinkerton,
finding people.
Yeah.
Pinkerton investigations, and you will find some stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm expecting them to call us one of these days.
I hope so.
We got a really tough mystery here. We just can't crack it.
Well, since we solve everything.
I know.
They're not going to call us because you know what's going to happen is Joe's going to answer their phone. He's going, duh, it was a chupacabra.
I know.
Dun, dun, dun.
Send me my money and hang up.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we don't give Joe the phone.
See, I can just picture that though. Yeah, get out my magnifying glass. I see you. You see right over here? This track looks like nothing, but it's actually a chupacabra track. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, enough of that. So anyway, the Pinkertons did more of the same. They searched hospitals, morgues, same thing. Except that they were able to cast a wider net since they weren't one single attorney. And actually, after they thought about the tickets and everything, they sent some detectives to Europe to look for her also. And so they spent a lot of money on this.
I gotta raise something that I was reading the newspaper accounts and the stuff about the Pinkertons, and of course they couldn't send somebody to Europe to look for her getting off the boat because they couldn't get there fast enough, so they had to wire her description. Mm-hmm. So
I guess
I know what this woman looks like according to a written description, and they find a number of women who they think could look like her, but who say they aren't her. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, one, a written description of somebody is very far-flung from what they actually look like, and two, if I walk up and I say, "Excuse me, are you Dorothy?" And you go, "No, dude,
no.
I'm Jane. I'm from Illinois." "Oh, sorry," and let's move about your business. How effective of a search means is this?
This is very true. I mean, I don't know. Back in those days, they couldn't exactly email some photos.
Well, that's what I mean. Is that they sent people to look for people getting off the boats. It's like, this doesn't seem like it's got a high probability of success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can see that. Europe's kind of a big place.
Man, looking for people was really hard back in those days.
Looking for people today is hard.
I know, and you can email stuff and make things viral, and
I lose people in crowds that I know.
Yeah.
Like, where were you? 2 feet in front of you. Really?
I was hiding from you. I was hoping never to see you again.
Obviously.
In plain sight.
Yeah.
So they looked in Europe because of the steamliner brochures, right?
Yeah.
Were there any other reasons that they found to look in New York? Or, in Europe? Yeah.
Well, there was one other guy, yeah. There was George Griscom, who it turns out went to Italy. I'm not sure exactly when he went over there, but he was in Italy with his folks, tootling around.
He was with his parents.
Yeah, he was with his parents. Yeah, they telegraphed him. Apparently, they got a hold of him, and he telegraphed them back and said he didn't know anything about what happened to Dorothy, and they weren't buying it. So apparently, Mother Mary and her older brother John went to Naples to confront him.
No, not the mother's older brother, but Dorothy's older brother.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Her son John. Dorothy's
her son
older
John.
brother.
Okay.
Yeah. So he denied it, and he gave them a letter that he'd received from her in December, apparently. Although in some accounts it says that he gave them a sheaf of letters.
Yeah, like a case of them.
Yeah,
that was what I had read. Yeah,
or a packet or something like that. But so the letter, this last letter mentioned that she had just she'd just been rejected by McClure's again. That she was kind of depressed over the whole thing. And that, of course, fueled speculation that she may have committed suicide because she was so down over this whole thing about not getting her stories accepted.
Yeah, and the hard thing with Griscom is I spent a lot of time looking at him, trying to pin down when he went to Italy. Because I thought,
That's what I was curious about, too.
Yeah, I really was.
Everybody thinks, oh, maybe he murdered her. You know?
Well, yeah, and so I was like, well, okay, well, when the heck did he leave the country?
I wasn't able to find that
and
out.
all you can ever find is when he came back.
Yeah, I know.
Nothing says when he left, which either means that A, reporters just didn't think to ask, or B, he just never said how long he'd been on holiday.
Yeah, I guess I got the sense that he'd been gone for a while, and finding out that he went with his family kind of makes his story less suspicious to me.
Yeah, because it wasn't like he was escaping the heat or anything like that.
Yeah,
it also sounds like if he was over there and she was sending him a bunch of letters to the point where he had a whole sheaf of them or a whole packet of them, that he was over there for a while.
Well, and that they had found letters in her possession, right, that had a foreign
postmarks.
code.
So
they
were
could have been corresponding.
even though they were forbidden to see each other.
So I would suspect that he had been overseas for a while.
Well, there'd been 3 months between their rendezvous in September, and then when she disappeared in December. That's a 3-month time span. If you write every couple of days, that's going to be a stack of letters after a couple of months.
Yeah, well, I was kind of assuming that that he was not hanging on to every letter ever that she wrote, but just the ones that he'd received.
He's a dude.
Since he'd arrived in Europe, and maybe the ones while he was in the States were back home in a drawer. But I assumed that the ones in that sheaf were just ones that he'd received in Europe.
Sure, and let's reiterate the fact that those letters come over on ships.
Yeah, they take a while to get there.
It takes a while to get there and back. So if you have a couple, even just like 5 or 6, that represents a couple weeks. Either way.
Yeah. And so that last letter probably got that in, who knows, mid to late December, maybe even January.
Yeah.
And by the way, this confrontation took place in January 1911.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And she disappeared in December. It seems
12th.
Unlikely to me that he was in the States at that point, but, who knows?
Okay, so anyway, we're back. We're going to resume the history, just one more little thing, and then we're going to talk about some theories about what happened. So, anyway, at about 6 weeks after the disappearance, the police persuaded Francis Arnold, her dad, to hold a press conference, and he did, and by this time he had been convinced that she was dead. And so he said at the press conference that he thought that she'd been murdered in Central Park and thrown into the reservoir. And so everybody in town started drinking bottled water.
Just like in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, and then, but there was one problem with that theory, was as the police pointed out to him that it was the temperature was like 22 degrees or 21 degrees on the day that she disappeared. So and the lake was frozen over, and people had been skating on it. So. I'm not sure why he was so convinced that she had been murdered and much less thrown in the lake.
He was so convinced that she was dead that in his will,
she wasn't mentioned
later. Yeah. No, she was mentioned specifically that he left no provisions for her because he had been sufficiently convinced that she was dead.
Yeah.
He said, in fact, I am intentionally not leaving anything for her because in my mind she's dead.
Yeah.
Which is like a step extra, right?
Yeah.
It's not only saying well, my daughter's dead, so I'm just not going to mention her. It's saying, I'm going to take the time out in my will to say, oh no, she's absolutely dead.
Yeah.
So that to me is a little hinky.
Well, and we're about to get into theories, right?
Yeah.
So let me just throw out this random one.
Yeah.
And this is fueled by my extensive knowledge of New York socialite behavior from watching Castle. Is that they do all kinds of weird things to protect the family name. So if he is so convinced that she's dead, how do we know he didn't have her knocked?
Well, we don't.
Because if he's like, I'm just going to make a provision. She was thrown into the reservoir. That's because that's what the guy that I hired her to knock her off for whatever offense he deemed so terrible to get rid of her for, had said he had done.
And then the guy goes to throw her in, and it's frozen over. So
and she skips,
joke's on you.
And then he drags her somewhere else. But it's plausible.
Well,
if this guy was from the start, he was dang near from the start. It sounded like he was convinced she was dead.
Well, not from the start. I mean, but I think as time went by, he just became convinced that she was dead for God knows what reason. Probably.
But and again, this is the newspaper recounts, which makes it difficult. But he seemed to be one of the first ones that I noticed saying, "I'm pretty sure she's dead."
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's him being practical and, detaching
Accepting
himself
the
from the
inevitable,
situation
yeah.
because his daughter is missing and
Right.
he's got no other choice but to presume she's dead. Or maybe it's, well, I sort of know, and let me just lean towards this theory and see if anybody else follows me with it.
Yeah. Well, this guy knew his daughter pretty well, probably. I mean, most people know their family members really well. So the options, like she like say just left, just for whatever reason, or just ran away from home. He may have known her well enough to know that could never happen. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, look at her behavior regarding her literary rejections. Mm-hmm. She didn't have a lot of stick-to-itiveness. I mean, he maybe understood that she didn't have, what's the word that I'm thinking about here?
Resilience?
Chutzpah.
The resilience, the chutzpah, to actually go out and make a life of her own. He probably figured that if she did run away from home, she would have been back in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
right?
she would be like me running away from home and making it halfway across the block and sitting there being like, why are they coming after
me? Yeah.
This is such a long walk.
I know.
I'm tired. I'm hungry.
She could have. There were some theories that she'd had an accident and had amnesia, and she was in a hospital somewhere. But obviously they'd searched all that, so that possibility was ruled out. And there's not, so there's not that many possibilities in his mind. Probably it's like she hasn't come back, and I know she would be back by now if she was still alive and it didn't have amnesia, so she's got to be dead. And she didn't just up and die because she was in good health. So that means that, in New York, it was a dangerous place.
Yeah.
Back in those days, it's very possible somebody. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yes, we are.
Okay, let's talk about theories. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's actually still, even today, many years later, there's still people talking about this. There's a website called Web Sleuths. Have you seen those guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen those guys.
we know those guys pretty well.
I almost made it to an entire thread, and it
Wow.
went on for years. I mean, it was a long thread. And boy, I mean, I found a few useful little nuggets in there, but holy crap, I had to wade through just a ton of bills.
That's why
find out.
I think that's why Steve and I just don't do that anymore.
Yeah. I found that I will read about the first dozen and then I quit.
Yeah.
If I can find a link to 3 good things in a row, I will link it and we'll read it. But pretty much other than that, I just can't.
Yeah.
It's the issue with all forums, but we've gone into that before. So.
Oh yeah. But anyway, there's a lot of theorizing on those, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And actually, as this thread went on that I was reading through, it's like the one theory that came out, seemed to come out on top, that more and more of them seemed to believe in, was our theory number 1, which is that Dorothy ran away to join the circus.
Okay, but not the circus, but ran away.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
That's the Joe interpretation.
Yeah, exactly. To the
theory.
point where all these people are, lots and lots of these people are saying, I hope she just really had a wonderful life, and yada yada, and it's like, dudes, really, I mean, and it's kind of a group thing kind of thing, because there were other theories that were kind of prevalent, and then more and more of them seem to trend to this whole that she ran away to get away from her domineering father.
So what is this theory?
Yeah, and so in this interpretation, she was chafing on her domineering father, although it's not necessarily clear that he was domineering, and there was a lot of this on this particular Web Sleuth thread, that her family was they were completely mean to her, they tormented her.
That was the whole thing about finding out about her writing,
and just sneering at her and mocking at her, but there's not much evidence in that. I mean, this stuff kind of, it got to the point where, in this thread, for example, it built to this point where they're saying, it started out with, they're teasing her, they're mocking her, and then it got to the point where they were so vicious towards her. I don't blame her for leaving. I mean, they just convince themselves of this stuff.
Well, and the only bit of evidence that really I've seen in researching this was that she stopped getting mail for her writing at the house. She got a P.O. box.
Yeah.
So that the family didn't see those letters come through.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if she had one rejection, and then she got a P.O. box because they teased her, and she got a second rejection. Okay, well, that just makes sense. My family doesn't need to know what I'm doing.
Well,
exactly. They can be jerks because they're family.
That's the whole thing, is you're 25 years old, you're living at home, but you don't want your parents and your family to be in all your stuff, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean her family was being nasty to her.
Yeah, that whole theory really, screams to me kind of demographic that comments on threads like this very often, right? And I am not so far out of this demographic of the kind of mid to late teens, early 20s demographic, where it's very easy to like play the victim and like identify with that person who's like being victimized and like, oh man, her life was so hard. Mm-hmm. It's like you forget that, oh my gosh, she was being given like $2,400 a month just for existing.
I know.
You know, like she was living a totally pampered life. Yeah, maybe like her family was tormenting her, but probably not tormenting her, probably just like every family does, where you're just like, oh, God, the writer over there, the artist over there, which my family does all the time. Everybody's family does. That's part of a healthy family dynamic.
Yeah, sure.
But when you're in your like mid to late teens, early 20s, you see that as like, oh, my family hates me. My life is so hard. Yeah. And I think with stories like this, it's really easy to grab onto that one little tiny nugget of like the way that family life could be. And ignore everything else and say, well, she was tormented. Thank God she left.
No, yeah, exactly. Like, this is the thread. They're reading each other's postings, you know, and so it's sort of like a rumor, you know. It just gets out of one person reads this and somebody adds just a little bit
chain
to
mail,
it.
Right?
Yeah, it's chain
today's
mail.
Chain mail.
Yeah, so anyway, so there's some theories that people have out there that she left to start a life of her own. And other people say that she left to run off with George Griscom or somebody else and start a new life. But on the flip side, as you were saying, she had a pampered life. Everything was taken care of, and she had that big fat allowance. And she didn't have to spend that if she wanted to buy stuff. She could put things on the family account.
Yeah.
And as we discussed earlier, she wasn't really like a stick-to-her-guns kind of lady.
No, exactly.
You know, she
Plus,
would have gotten into it and realized it was hard and probably come back and said, oops, just kidding.
Yeah, and even, you know, I think that even if she'd left and actually made a good life for herself, unless there was some hideous abuse that I'm not aware of, I think sooner or later she would have contacted her family.
I agree.
You know? I mean, so that's why I think this is just pure BS. I
agree.
Yeah. All right. The next theory, botched abortion, part 1. Yeah. Okay.
Part 1?
Part 1 botched abortion.
12,
yeah. All right. So the Pittsburgh Press published an article April 10th, 1914.
This is the like kind of coherent one we were talking about, right?
The semi-coherent one, the one that contradicts itself just a little bit. Yeah. Because of this article, a lot of people are out there theorizing that Dorothy went to an abortion clinic in Pittsburgh and died there due to a botched abortion. A lot of people make a lot about the location, which is in Pittsburgh. That's where Griscom lived at the time. His family
but he wasn't there.
Yeah, and but the fact is I don't know if he was there or not.
No, he wouldn't have been if he received.
He should have been. He should have been in Europe at this time.
Well, but if he received a letter in December, anytime in December, really. In Italy, it would have had to have been sent
it seems
early December.
It seems that he could not have been there, yes.
Wait. We're making a presumption here that he kept the letter in the envelope that it arrived in to prove that he was there.
I gotta be honest with you, I think that people were suspicious enough of him that had he been lacking the envelope or been able to otherwise not able to prove that...
Well, he's a pretty rich dude. I think he could have persuaded people to not be looking for... Listen,
I'm not sure.
I opened the letter and I threw the envelope into the fire because I just needed to get the fire going.
Well, I don't know exactly what kind of stationery she used, but back in those days, I mean, I have after my parents died, I inherited a lot of the family archives, and from those days, back in the old days. Stuff that went across the ocean was generally they had this. It was like this blue paper, where the paper of the letter itself folded up and made the envelope, because that's to save weight and save postage. And so, of course, Dorothy didn't necessarily need to do that. She was rich, so maybe she could actually have a letter in an envelope. But back in the old days, I can show you some of those things. It was like it just sort of really super thin paper, and it all folded together neatly and made the envelope, and the letter was the envelope. And so it might have been that.
Yeah,
and a lot of people keep envelopes. You know, you read the letter and then you stick the letter back in the envelope and you put it in your box.
No, I'm guilty of that. I admit.
Yeah,
I have lots of bills that are still in their envelopes.
Yeah, but anyway, you know, I'm not saying.